to join us, and then we're going to get started. Welcome.
And to answer the question in the chat, yes, the viewers are on mute. So there will be a Q&A opportunity. You can put any questions in the Q&A section as well in the interim.
Thank you, Kendall. Cameron, can I invite you onto the screen to go over the accessibility and accommodations that we have available today?
Absolutely. Thank you, Christina. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the PSPS Town Hall. My name is Cameron Moore. I am Communications and Marketing Man Description. I am a Caucasian male in his mid-30s wearing glasses, and I have a beard, and I'm wearing an orange button-down shirt. Before we begin, I'm going to go over a couple of Zoom accessibility logistics for you. First off, if you would like to access captions, please go to the meeting controls on the bottom of your screen and select the CC icon titled Live Transcript. And you can click the option Show Subtitle to gain access to captioning. Alternatively, you can use the stream text link, which is going to be dropped in the chat. This is a great option because you can change the font size, font color, or make the captioning full screen. Please note that the chat is reserved for networking and interacting with one another. So please have fun connecting. But any and all questions for our panelists should be entered in a Q&A, locating it in meeting controls at the bottom of your screen, or signaled with a raised hand, a function which is also located in the meeting controls at the bottom of your screen, if this is the most accessible option. Please note that we'll be reserving the last 15 minutes of our session for Q&A, and we will try our best to address everyone's questions with the time that we have. Thank you so much for sitting through my bit of housekeeping, and now I will pass it over to William.
Thank you very much for that. We look forward to getting you a lot of good information tonight. I'm William Simonsick. I am a policy advocate here at Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County in our Disaster Assistance Project. Joining me tonight, also from NLS, Jacob Zarefsky, Jordan Davis, the Disability Rights California, Sydney Pickern of California Foundation of Independent Living Centers, also Kendall Jarvis, Legal Aid Sonoma County, and last but not least, Melissa Cannon of Nourish, California. So there will be multiple topics that are discussed here. We're going to have some overlap with disaster response. There is an absolute and major coincidence on that. Several of us are also in disaster response, but this is also because public safety power shutoffs are a disaster. This is causing a lot of hardship across the state. What you see in terms of how these impact you, how these events affect you, is similar to what we see in disasters. So I'm going to begin with a little bit of disaster preparedness tonight. And because I am a disaster response attorney, you're going to get a bit of a reiteration of making an emergency plan and other similar tips. But first, let me share who we are at Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County. We are a nonprofit law firm that provides free legal services. We are a legal services corporation, so we provide completely free legal services to low-income individuals across Los Angeles County in the Antelope, San Fernando, and San Gabriel valleys. We have more than 80 lawyers on staff, and we represent many different language capabilities, far more than I could list in these slides. We cover a variety of legal areas: housing, healthcare, workers' issues, unemployment, domestic violence, family, public benefits, clean slate reentry, immigration, education issues, and of course, issues that disaster survivors face through the Disaster Assistance Project. We have locations across Los Angeles County. We have offices in Pacoima, El Monte, Glendale, and Boyle Heights. We work with multiple community-based organizations in the Antelope Valley. We have self-help centers and 5 courthouses in Los Angeles County for healthcare centers throughout Los Angeles County. And I'm proud to say we help hundreds of thousands of individuals and families every year with their legal issues. 1 second. We are noticing some slight technical difficulties. As you notice, we should be moving forward. So let me try to fix this. Are we seeing that slide there?
Yes, we can see it.
5 tips preparing for disasters. All right. So, as I said, disaster response means that you're going to get some disaster response tips. This is part and parcel, of course, of what we're dealing with today. The wildfire risk across the state is very real, and it is a very dangerous situation that we all need to be prepared for. The first thing to do is very simple, and I'm not going to be the only person to say this today. And honestly, if you tune in the presentation I give, you're going to hear it every time. Make an evacuation plan. Red Cross and ready.gov have resources to help with this. You need to be able to be ready to leave quickly and on circumstances that you may not be able to control. Having important items ready for evacuation is a major part of that. There is also a geography element. As many of you reside in areas that are very access restricted, potentially in the canyon, in a more rural area, finding multiple backup evacuation routes is very crucial. Issues change, disasters change, weathers change. Intended routes may not be available when you are trying to leave. This is mainly aimed at aid and insurance, but take pictures of the items you own. It's a simple step that many of us forget, and I will admit until I did this position, myself included. The reason that you do this is to be able to prove that you in fact had those items prior to the disaster striking. Associated with this is doing something like a home inventory form. The Department of Insurance has forms to help with this. There are also apps online. It's just mainly important that you are able to prove this because, as I will say multiple times in the next couple of minutes, the deadlines are very short when you're applying for aid. So having all of this ready to go means that you will be able to potentially successfully complete your application. And it's regrettable, but those deadlines do not wait around if you're not prepared.
Well, I'm sorry to interject, but we still are seeing 5 tips for preparing for disasters. It hasn't moved forward on our end.
That is weird. Wait, let's see. What about now?
William, it looks like you went off screen with your PowerPoint. It may be that when you start sharing again, make sure that your slide deck is in the move.
Did that fix it?
We do.
You're on number 3.
Excellent.
The title in your name.
All right. Always prepared, I suppose. I will actually, I'll move forward from here. Putting title in your name, as I was discussing previously in terms of preparedness, is one major element of receiving aid. If you're trying to, say, receive aid in terms of rebuilding your house, they are going to request proof of ownership. Similarly, trying to prove a loss of a car or any other sort of property that would have title in it is very difficult if you do not have the title. There are deadline extensions, as there are for many replacement documents. Do not rely on this. These proceedings, such as probate, can take quite a long time if you do not already have title in your name. And those, once again, as I said, I'll say multiple times, those deadlines do not wait. If it's a mobile home issue, potentially contact Housing Community Development. Otherwise, potentially us, the Disaster Legal Assistance Collaborative can potentially connect you to other legal aid firms. There are plenty of legal aid firms in the state that would be happy to help. This one is not as fun in part because of how expensive it is, having been through the process myself. But insurance absolutely helps in recovery because the aid grants that you get from, say, a governmental source are unlikely to cover all of the repairs that you may need. And that gap will just leave you in a poor financial state. It's important to read all of the policy details. As a personal example, I had to get rental insurance on my apartment that I'm into here today, presenting from. That does not cover earthquake damages. So I had to get an additional policy to cover that. Specifically, I wanted a policy that had additional living expenses. And this is a very key term. Additional living expenses is a set amount of money that you will get when there is a payout in the insurance that helps provide living expenses. Likely in a disaster that causes an insurance payout, where you live, your apartment or your house may be damaged, and you will need to find alternative housing. The additional living expenses help cover that. If you have additional questions, of course, contact the Department of Insurance. As I said about important documents, you want to have those ready. And some of that is keeping it in a safe place. It's important to remember both a fireproof and waterproof bag. The fireproof nature of safe does not translate to covering it when there is an issue, say when they're putting the fire out with water. So you want both of these things to make sure your documents make it through. As I said, there are deadline extensions, fee waivers to do replacement documents. You will be very busy at that stage. This is something you want to have done ahead of time, so you're not having to deal with that stress while you're in the middle of rebuilding and regrouping and getting your family into a safe situation. Things that you need to include: identification papers, basic documents that you need to prove your identity, so passport, driver's license, birth certificate, proof of the property. That may be a lease agreement, that may be mortgage papers, and maybe a title to your house, title to your car. You also would want to be able to make sure you still have documents that you need to prove because of the document's existence, right? So visa paperwork, wills, power of attorney forms. Medical issues are a major issue after a disaster. Family courts, custodies, restraining orders, any sort of individual education plans, because you may need to relocate and have to use those in a new place while you're rebuilding. There are many, many issues that arise in disasters, and I won't spend all day going on about them, because I could spend all day going on about them. And we're actually planning to at NLS in a few months. As I said multiple times, and this is something I will ingrain in everybody's head if I can, the deadlines are short for aid. It is sad how many people apply to our services and have missed those deadlines, and there isn't very much we can do. Scams are a major issue. I assume some door-to-door salespeople are nice and are on the up and up, but a huge number are not. Never use a door-to-door service. It's probably, aside from FEMA and SB application issues, it would be our next most seen issue in disaster, is just simple contracting scams and scams from door-to-door repair services. As I said, many other areas are implicated: housing, unemployment, benefits. But on that note, I'm going to switch over to my colleague, Jacob Zarefsky, who is going to share some utility protections that apply when there has been a state of emergency.
Thank you, William. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jacob Zarefsky I'm the Equal Justice Works Disaster Fellow, also working at Neighborhood Legal Services. And today I'm going to be discussing utility protections after a disaster. Before I get started, I just wanted to mention that I'm in a communal room. So if you hear any weird background noises, please bear with me. Apologize for that. But without further ado, let's get started. So first, just a little brief overview. When a disaster occurs and your utility service is impacted by that disaster, you may have certain rights. So what is a disaster in this context? A disaster occurs when the president or the governor declares a state of emergency in your area. Now, the protections that I'm about to go over are mainly apply to electricity and gas service, but it also applies to water service in a more limited capacity. Next slide. So here's a list of protections that you may be eligible after a disaster. Remember, this is if your utilities are interrupted for whatever reason. Unfortunately, can't go too extensively into each of these protections, but want to give a brief overview to all of you. So first things first, if your service is worse or interrupted for whatever reason, you should not be billed. If you can't pay your bill, you should be offered a payment plan. If you're having difficulty paying on time, then you should not be charged late fees for 1 year after the disaster. So that's 12 months after the date that the disaster is declared. Your service should also not be stopped for non-payment for 1 year after the disaster. If you move, your power should be turned on and off quickly. And if you're not familiar with these programs, the CARE or FERA programs provide discounted gas and electricity for low-income utility customers. So if you are eligible for those programs and are interested in joining them, they cannot be removed from your plan for, once again, a year after the disaster. Next slide. So here's some tips on how to prepare for disaster. Number one, always have up-to-date information on file with your utility, with your preferred spoken language, your medical status, and your contact information. You want to make sure these utility companies have the most up-to-date information so they can reach you at the most convenient time and with the most accurate information. And moving on, here's some of the programs that I was referring to. CARE, FERE provide discounted gas and utility service. Other programs such as CalFresh will be discussed further on in this presentation. Another tip, sign up for alerts on your phone or email. Make sure they're based on your address and not your zip code. Finally, always have an emergency plan in place and stay prepared. Next slide. So here's some resources. First, you can always contact your utility company directly with issues. Second, you can call us, Neighborhood Legal Services, if you have problems with utilities. Our number will be at the end of this presentation. You can also complain to the California Public Utilities Commission at the link below, cpuc.ca.gov/complaints. Finally, you can contact the Department of Fair Employment and Housing if you are being discriminated against. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob, for that presentation. I am back on for a brief discussion of medical insurance and disasters in states of emergency. Similar with the utility, and although it's worth mentioning, and this is where it gets a bit complicated, and if you do have questions, absolutely reach out to one of us presenting today. It varies based on if it's a federal or state emergency, depending on what particular health plan you're discussing. So for Medi-Cal, you are able to receive faster eligibility decisions, enrollment, there are reduced application requirements, monthly premiums or collections are suspended. You are able to request to transfer your service to a new county if you have to relocate. If you have issues, contact the Managed Care Division Ombudsman or one of our organizations, and we will, either they or I will try to help you. What's also very important is that for both Medicare and Covered California, a special enrollment period exists because of the disaster in itself. You get to at least 60 days of the applicable incident period. So Medicare would be a FEMA disaster, Covered California would potentially be a state disaster, or whichever period would cover. No additional documentation is required. It's simply there because of the disaster. The idea being you may have to relocate, and that would force you to look for a new provider, and potentially a plan would be better in a different area where you're relocated from. Similarly, DMHC managed plans are required to give you access to medically necessary healthcare services when you have to move. Adequate provider networks are still required under Medi-Cal, and that includes authorization from our network of providers, urgent care within 48 hours if there's prior authorization, 96 if there is not. For Medicare, similarly, out-of-network care is available if there's a federal or state declaration of emergency. Some plans suspend authorization requirements. They lower co-payments. This is something to discuss with your healthcare plan or to consult those documents. But there are special protections put in place for if you need to relocate, or if heaven forbid, I'm in Southern California, the big one strikes and there are medical facilities that are unavailable. If, say, a hospital has to close, that you would be able to go to another one. If your primary care physician was not available, you could find another one. So specifically, and this is important for people who are facing power shutoffs, Medi-Cal beneficiaries are entitled to a 72-hour fill of prescription drugs due to a state of emergency. And for some drugs can receive up to 100-day supply. So if you are under a Medi-Cal plan and have a medical spoilage issue, you want to immediately go get replacements, and you are entitled to these. Similarly, Medicare Plan D plans have to list certain limits and allow out-of-network pharmacy access if they are otherwise unavailable in network. If you're uninsured, there are a few programs. There is the Emergency Prescription Assistance Program, which provides free refills. I have a number in the slides here, as you can contact me or otherwise be able to search for that to find more information. Similarly, in a disaster that FEMA responds to, so say a federal disaster, there are two types of aid that may help with medical expenses. Other needs assistance is just general grants that may cover medical insurance or other things not covered by health insurance. You apply for this at a disaster recovery center, which will use usually, if it's in Los Angeles County, you will see potentially me or Jacob at that. Otherwise, contact FEMA or apply at disasterassistance.gov. There is also the critical needs assistance, which may provide a one-time $500 payment for necessary items, life-saving items, and that would include life-saving medication. So those are two additional options. So as Jacob mentioned about me providing our number, if you need help with a disaster-related legal issue, we are here to help. This is this 800 number, 870-0732, is for our disaster assistance project. We are also on social media. You can come search for NLSLA on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and contact us to apply. NLSLA.org is our web address. You can apply online. For disaster-related issues, contact 1-800-870-0732. For any other inquiries, say another housing issue, something not related to disaster, or if you need a language other than English, please contact our general hotline at 1-800-433-6251. And if you have a PSPS related question or just want to know where you want to go to get services, where in NLS that may be, you can feel free to contact me. My email address is there, williamsimonsick@nlsla.org. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. I will now be switching over to Jordan Davis at Disability Rights California for her presentation.
Thank you, William. Like he said, my name is Jordan Davis. I am an Equal Justice Works Disaster Resilience Fellow with Disability Rights California. We're a statewide organization who help folks with disabilities in a variety of legal matters, some of them including civil rights, instances of abuse and neglect. We have an education team and help with pathways to work. And today I'm going to be talking about public safety power shutoffs, just to give a little overview of what they are and some of the resources that the utility companies provide during these events. Next slide, please. So what is a public safety power shutoff? During certain weather conditions like high wind, high heat, utility companies will temporarily shut off power in those areas that they think are going to be high risk at causing a wildfire. As we saw in the Paradise Fire and several others, the downed power lines and a mix of these weather conditions caused these wildfires. Next slide, please. And so With the PSPS events and the power being temporarily shut off, early warnings are incredibly important for folks who have access and functional needs. So an advanced notification of a power shutoff can really help you if you rely on medical equipment that requires being charged or it needs to be plugged in, or if you have medicine that may go bad if it's not stored at a certain temperature. These notifications can be really helpful so that you could make arrangements prior to the power being cut off. Next slide, please. And so you can get these notifications if you sign up with your utility company. Most California utility companies offer customers with access and functional needs advanced warnings on top of the ones they already provide for general customers. You can choose which notifications suit you best. Some of these include phone calls, texts, emails, TTY, and in the case that they can't contact you after repeated tries, they may send someone in person to your door to make sure that you know that the power will be shut off and give an estimate of how long this PSPS event will last. Next slide, please. Okay, so Pacific Gas and Electric Company, also known as PG&E, when they do a PSPS event and they have to shut off power, they will set up community resource centers in those areas. At their centers, they provide ADA accessible restrooms and hand washing stations. They also have basic medical equipment charging and device charging for like your cell phone, your laptop, things like that. They also offer Wi-Fi and some other amenities if they're available. What is important for getting the advanced notifications, if you are someone with access and functional needs, is to sign up for their medical baseline program. They do have some requirements, and you have to show proof through a doctor's note that you are someone who needs these advanced notifications. But once you sign up, they'll make sure that you get the notifications by the way that you would like them. So like I said, either phone or email, text, they make sure they get that to you. And then they also give you additional electricity allowance for a day. So that's like 500 kilowatts a day and or 25 therms of gas a month in order to offset your electrical uses with your devices. Next slide, please. And Southern California Edison, also known as SoCal Edison, they offer community crew vehicles and community resource centers whenever they do a PSPS event. At their centers, you can get access to customer service teams. If you have questions about the outages, they also offer, when available, what they call customer resiliency kits. They include PSPS information, light snacks, water, small resiliency devices like batteries, and personal protective equipment like face masks. They too also have a medical baseline program. So if you sign up for that, or if you qualify, you should receive additional advanced notifications, and you should receive an additional 16.5 kilowatts an hour of electricity per day being charged at the lowest baseline rate. Next slide. And San Diego Gas and Electric Company, they also offer community resource centers where you can find information about the current shutoff, also access to water, ice, snacks, and mobile charging stations. Next slide, please. And lastly, Bear Valley Electric, they also will set up a community resource center at their headquarters whenever they do a PSPS event. And they also offer information about the shutoff, water and ice, Wi-Fi, internet access, first aid kits, snacks, phone charging stations, blankets, flashlights, batteries, and charging stations for your medical devices, access to cellular networks, PSPS representatives, restrooms, chairs, and if they're available, transportation to and from the center. Next slide, please. I know we're reserving questions until the end, so if you have any questions about those, please put them in the chat. Just want to say thank you so much for listening. And if you need any more information about these resources, please contact your utility company, either through their website or by phone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan, for that presentation. Next, we will have Sydney Pickern of the California Foundation of Independent Living Centers.
Thank you, William, and thank you, Jordan. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. And my name is Sydney Pickern, and I am the manager of the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers Disability Disaster Access and Resources Program, or DDAR for short. I'm also a person with a disability and a wheelchair user. And we will definitely get into what DDAR has to offer, but because this will be a relatively quick overview, I want to remind folks that if you have questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. And also you can reach out to me at sydney@cfilc.org. Next slide, please. So Jordan covered some of this. I just wanted to make sure that folks understand when we use the acronym PSPS, we are talking about Public Safety Power Shutoffs, and that these are planned power outages that many of the major electric utility providers engage in to limit the risk of wildfire. And so these outages, these PSPS events, can last anywhere from a few hours to multiple days. And because they're planned, like Jordan said, Californians, of course, have the opportunity to register for advanced alerting, to be informed at least the goal really, the time that they're supposed to be given an alert is 24 hours in advance of a PSPS event. And so just to reiterate, if you are not registered for these warnings, you should very much consider doing so. The point that I wanted to make also is that you do not have to be an account holder to register for an advanced alert. So if your electricity bill is paid through your landlord, for example, you can still register for advanced alerting. And again, Jordan covered some of this. I just wanted to make sure folks also understood that if you do enroll in Medical Baseline, which offers a discount to consumers who utilize electricity dependent medical equipment. If you do enroll in that, you will certainly be enrolled in the advanced alerting for PSPS events. And so again, the reason that advanced alerting is so important for this population is that it can save lives, because we as people with disabilities, we really need as much lead time as possible to be able to prepare for and respond to these events. And as a reminder, of course, the utility should be providing an array of formats that are accessible to the community. Next slide, please. So backup battery programs and resources. So we know that losing power can have negative effects and sometimes life-threatening effects on people with disabilities and older adults who rely on power to sustain life. And Jordan covered some of this, but just so we're all on the same page, this could mean folks who need electric power medical equipment, electric wheelchairs, CPAP machines, assistive technology, so this could be communications devices, or folks potentially who may be more susceptible to the effects of extreme heat or cold. Because of this reality, the major electric utilities are required to have programs and resources in place to help mitigate or limit the potential life-threatening consequences of these events. And so I've listed here some of the programs and resources that are available to the disability community specifically, as well as a few that are available to the broader community. And it should really be noted that each program has its own eligibility criteria, and each is a little different, as Jordan highlighted. But let's briefly go through the list. So of course, I put at the top the DDAR program. So there's a link to the application here, and there will be a link at the end of the slides as well. The DDAR program is considered a statewide program. We work directly with PG&E as well as some additional funders, And we provide an array of emergency planning and response resources, one of which is being able to assist all applicants with creating personalized preparedness plans, with which both previous presenters touched on. And we can also discuss just additionally why this is important for folks with disabilities. Additionally, the DDAR program provides year-round backup battery support. And then, of course, during PSPS events, hotel stays, transportation, and food and gas compensation is available. So the next program is PG&E's portable battery program. So if you are income qualified and meet their eligibility criteria, backup battery support is available. Again, I've also listed the link here. And I want to note for PG&E in particular that they also offer a number of food replacement support programs during PSPS events. And so there is a slide at the end of my presentation that includes some additional information on that. So folks will have access to that if they need to, but certainly if you are thinking about any of these resources, just typing into the utilities web pages, PSPS event, food support, AFN, access and functional need, these keywords will get you into this information. And of course, I wanted to reiterate, as Jordan said, all three of the large utilities provide community resource centers, which are stood up during PSPS events. They do provide limited resources to the broader community, and you should be able to, a number of hours before a PSPS event, go on the utilities website, do a search for your CRC locations, and be able to find where and if they're set up in your community. So the next program I have on here is Southern California Edison's Critical Care Program. So again, works in a similar fashion as PG&E's portable battery program, in that if you meet their eligibility criteria, you may also be eligible for a backup battery. And SDGE and PG&E also partner with 211. And so I know that there's additional resources that are available through both of these utilities. So again, if you live in these areas where these are the utilities that cover you, definitely go to their websites, definitely do these keyword searches for PSPS, AFN, battery, generator, whatever it is, and see what comes up, because that there's going to be something different across all of these sites. So the big takeaway from this slide really is that, number one, this is not an exhaustive list. Number two, each program is a little different. So again, you should look into what best suits your needs. And of course, just a reminder to use those keywords when you're searching for this type of information. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so diving a little deeper on DDAR. Our program is unique in a lot of ways. First and foremost, we consider ourselves a statewide cross-disaster emergency preparedness and response program, which really means that our focus is on building disaster resiliency for the disability and older adult community. And this is, again, by focusing on developing personal preparedness for any disaster or emergency. And really, one of the ways that we're able to do this is by coordinating with 19 independent living centers across the state, which have this deep disability community tie, which basically provides them with the expertise to provide on-the-ground support. And I've listed here, of course, the link to our the link on our website where you can actually look up the independent living center near you. And so briefly, just to go over again, DDAR offers an array of services and resources, including, of course, community-based disaster preparedness training, personal preparedness plans, year-round backup battery support, and then during active PSPS events, transportation, lodging, food, and gas if necessary. And I've listed here our eligibility criteria for our backup batteries and resources during events. And so just briefly, so residents in a high fire threat district area. So these are really areas designated by the California Public Utilities Commission and the state, I would say, where fires are more likely to occur. It's really, and it's based on, weather expertise. This is about high wind events and high wind areas. So number 2 is, of course, that someone has electricity dependent medical equipment, AT, assistive technology, or a medical need for power. And then, of course, a willingness to develop a personal preparedness plan and a willingness to either enroll in medical baseline or get enrolled in advanced alertings if that's not already happened. So next slide, please. So preparing for disasters, I know I'm gonna cut this a little short, but I wanted to also include a few tips for our community on preparing for disasters and emergencies. And so really, some of these items were covered previously, but again, just wanna take it home in this area. Register for PSPS alerts if you're not already. Register for your county and city emergency alerts. So your city and or county will probably have an alerting system that you should be able to register for either text or calls or emails. And that's for broad disasters, right? That's for the whole gauntlet. So number 3, make a list of 3 emergency contacts and let them know, hey, you're on my list. Hey, if this happens, I'm going to be calling you. This is the kind of support I need. Make a plan for accessible evacuation transportation. That one's pretty straightforward, but again, I think it's, having an understanding of what's available in your community, just having a list of either friends or family or another kind of transportation resource that could potentially assist you during a disaster or an emergency. William touched on this, of course. Keep your key documents together to be able to grab it and go. So this could look like insurance information, a list of your medications, your important documents. And so, of course, make a list of the medical equipment and or assistive technology that you're going to need when you leave. So this would be equipment you are able to carry yourself. This may be equipment that you would need assistance to carry and transport. And then, of course, this would include medication and refills for the remainder of the event. And then last but certainly not least, supplies. So this is your food, your water, your lighting, your battery powered cooler, your power bank for your phone or your computer, backup batteries, and then of course a radio, a battery powered radio or an electric, a solar powered radio. So this again is not an exhaustive list, but is just meant to be helpful and educational. William, I'm gonna have you skip to the last slide and I'm gonna just close out with thank you for being here today and for listening to us. And also, please, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. Again, my email is Sydney, SYDNEY@CFILC.org. And if you'd like more information on our program specifically or on accessible disaster and emergency response more generally, please go to our website, disabilitydisasteraccess.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sydney, for your presentation. And now, Kendall Jarvis, Legal Aid of Sonoma County.
The suspense is killing me. I can't see the slide deck. Thank you.
There we go. Sorry for the slight delay. And now Kendall Jarvis, Legal Aid of Sonoma County.
I need 2 introductions, obviously. So as William said, my name is Kendall Jarvis. I'm the lead disaster relief attorney for Legal Aid of Sonoma County. We started the disaster relief program for Legal Aid of Sonoma County in 2017 after the Sonoma complex fires. At that time, we had no idea what would happen moving forward and or how long this program would be necessary in the community and throughout the state. And fortunately and unfortunately, we have grown significantly and have had the opportunity to really make a difference both locally and on a state and federal level. Next slide. So here's my email if anyone, and my phone number. If anyone wants to email me or call me, feel free. I'm always happy to chat about things. I know one of the things I say to clients or really anyone I interact with is all of this stuff is a learning process. So we need to have conversations and we need to keep having those conversations. In general, from a legal aid standpoint, we're not dissimilar to anyone else on this panel, which is, our aim is to protect those who are most vulnerable and promote access to social justice. But in reality, one of the things that we really learn is from a disaster standpoint, the vulnerabilities kind of change. We view things from a traditional vulnerability standpoint, like you're low income or you're elderly or you're disabled or something of that nature. But something that a disaster brings is A, exacerbates the vulnerabilities, and then B, creates a new sector of vulnerabilities that might not have existed but for the disaster. So I mention this mostly to say, don't be afraid to reach out to your legal aid or any organizations or similar organizations to the ones that have been discussed here, because there is a recognition of that, especially in California where the cost of living is so high. Next slide, please. So an example of some of the things that legal aid can do or can help with is, as I mentioned, the disaster relief program, but we have a number of other programs. So people can get help with housing issues. If you're elderly, 60 plus, you can get help with a broad array of legal issues. Obviously, we do the more traditional legal aid things like domestic violence, civil harassment, guardianship. And we have recently, in the past couple of years, also opened up veterans programs, homelessness prevention programs, and medical partnership programs. So again, it's not necessarily what everyone thinks of legal aid, but it is one of those things that we're not the only one expanding in the state. So, us and NLSLA, all of the acronyms we need to learn, they also have, a broader array than I think what people traditionally think from sort of a legal assistance standpoint. Next slide, please. So everyone's talked about this. I knew that they would take all my slides and then I would have to be the one to just, cover the same thing again. No, just kidding. But realistically speaking, at this point, unfortunately, everyone knows what PSPS is, right? The reality behind PSPS, and the reason I included this slide was not because I didn't think that other people would tell you what it was and that you didn't already know, but that there is an important aspect of PSPS from a legal standpoint that I think a lot of people don't think about. And that is that the California Public Utilities Commission is required to oversee any utility for starters. And then secondarily, they're required to oversee PSPS events themselves. In theory, the PSPS event started as a question of last resort. Like, if we can't do anything else, then we can turn off the power to protect the state. That was how it was designed. But because of the number of fires we've had as a result of utility infrastructure issues, as well as a result of sort of the pressures to try and fix these issues combined with the, especially PG&E going through bankruptcy or the financial pressures, it has been skewed a bit. So when PSPS started, we thought maybe this would last, a year, 2 years, 3 years. I think people thought the most would last 5 years. right now we're in a place where it's very, very plausible that this can last at least 12 to 14 years, and quite frankly, possibly more. So unfortunately, PSPS is going to be something that is a new normal, or something that we, just are going to have to deal with. The important part about the CPUC addressing these issues is that, and this was mentioned before, if there are issues with your utility or access to the things that you need, or a failure of reporting or getting alerts or being charged too much or whatever, that is something you can file a complaint about. And it's important to know that. And quite frankly, I think it's really important for Californians to do that, because there is definitely oversight on PSPS, but there's also sort of a disconnect between the understanding of how this really impacts people and households on an individual level versus what the intent is, right? There's a thought that like, oh, of course, if we're going to avoid creating a worse situation, people can go without power for a short period of time. However, myself being through PSPS events, for example, and fortunately enough, I have had access to the alerts and all of the things that can prepare you for that information. It's right in line with the work that I do, but we know that most people don't have that. So if they were turning power off for a short period of time, literally, that might be one thing, but we know that these can last for much longer than, in theory, they probably should, right? So it can be days, and that really is where the planning and preparation is so important. So, be familiar with the California Public Utilities Commission. Take a look at their website, see what your rights are as they've been described here so far, and I'll discuss in a minute too. And don't be afraid to file a complaint. I think the voice of the people is something that can help hopefully change some of this, because it impacts everyone, but it also impacts vulnerable peoples from an incredibly harder perspective. And that's something that we really need to address. Next slide, please. So the utility requirements, and I say in theory, but I say this often, and the reason I do is because theoretically, this is the legal requirement for actually having a PSPS event and to suspend power. It's also your right, though. So if this is something that is not met, as I said before, it is definitely worth filing a complaint with the CPUC and, quite frankly, with your utility itself. But the idea is that if your utility is going to engage in a PSPS event, they have to notify you early to warn of the potential outage. They have to notify you whether they actually engage in it or not. But the process works essentially from kind of a worst case scenario standpoint, where they say, okay, we know that there's going to be bad weather. We know that there's going to be high winds. We know that it's, a drought season, that kind of thing. And they say there's a possibility for us to have to engage a PSPS event. And if that occurs, then these sort of needs kick in, and notification is one of them. So just because you're notified doesn't necessarily mean an event is going to occur, but it is one of those things that you really, really want to keep an eye on, because you want to know, what are the conditions that end up most frequently in the area that you live being triggered, for PSPS events, right? And I think we all kind of have seen that over the past 3 to 4 years, where there are elements like, we know, okay, it's a red flag, we know it's hot, we know there's high winds, or we know there's lightning. But those are the things that can really, help you understand and adequately prepare for what's going on. And also not panic every time that these alerts come out. But as everyone else mentioned, definitely sign up for the alerts. You're entitled to them, period. But it's a good idea to sign up for the alerts from more than one location. So through your utility provider, through the city, through the county, There are certain alerts from the state. There are also alert apps that are not connected to any particular government entity that can be super helpful. So do that. The more you know, as they say, knowledge is power. They say that for a reason. So once you get an initial warning of a potential event, you're also supposed to get ongoing updates. And what that really means is that they're supposed to notify you, your utility is supposed to notify you of what's happening. If they're not going to go through with it, they're supposed to notify you. If they are going to go through with it, they're supposed to notify you. And the second point is important because oftentimes when a utility views a PSPS event, they're viewing it from a very broad perspective. Like, for example, there could be, 500,000 people that could be, or households that could be impacted by one PSPS event. But the utility is trying to make the best decisions they can with the poor infrastructure that they have to limit that. So it could turn out that you got an original notification, but then you get an update that says, yes, you're in the original target area. And obviously, don't quote me on this language. It's not how they say it, but this is the concept at large. Like, from now on, we know that your area is going to be okay, but other people in the surrounding areas may still lose power. So, or gas, all of the power, gas, and electric. PG&E is what's in my area. So, but it's important to, keep an eye on that. So you A, know when it could happen, you B, know if it's been downgraded. Those things are very important. Also, safety inspection. This is something we don't talk about a lot. But when power is turned off and there's been a wind event, especially, and power is turned back on, something you're entitled to is literally being safe for the power, A, to be restored, as the last B says, but also B, that it's restored safely. So if you have a concern about your home, your neighborhood, your community, if there's a felled tree and it doesn't appear anyone's attending to it, it is very, very fair for you to call your utility, for you to call the CPUC, for you to call the city, the county, whoever's in control of that area, and say, for you to call the cops, quite frankly, and say, hey, there's an issue here. This doesn't look safe. That's definitely true of your property, but it's also true of your community. So I don't want that to be lost on people, because that's something that I think we don't talk about enough, is the post PSPS and staying safe in that event. Next slide, please. So the big question, what should we look out for? The intent here is really to see sort of what you can do to try and limit the impact. And I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, because if your power's off, your power's off. So the overly burdensome reality of that is something that we can't fix, at least not yet. We're all working on it. But having a plan, as everyone has said, is super, super helpful. And as part of that plan, I think the thing that again gets a little lost on people is it's not just keep your emergency phone numbers, keep your documentation, have a secondary location if you have the ability to do so, making sure your utility provider is aware if you have any specific needs. But the other piece of the puzzle is knowing where to go when it happens, right? And that I don't think has been talked about as much, even though ironically it's kind of implied in the conversation we've had. But to know what community resources are available near you, if you know that you're a household that cannot replace the food in your refrigerator, or cannot replace the medicine that needs to be refrigerated, or does not have a backup battery that mysteriously powers itself, there are resources out there, as has been mentioned. Obviously CalFresh, Quick, things like that can help with food. There are also like local food banks. There are a number of community movements that have come out to say we really, really need to address these issues, because we understand that the financial impact on a household that is vulnerable, it's an impact on everyone, but especially for the vulnerable, it can be the difference between eating and not. It could be the difference between people being able to feed their kids and not. And there are a lot of community-based organizations that have stepped up to try and fill this gap that exists currently from a governmental standpoint, while there's this, background push and pull where PG&E is trying to figure out how to get out of bankruptcy, while all the utilities are trying to figure out exactly how to live in this, new situation where fires are just so frequent, and where the financial powers that be are putting pressure on, the utility industry and the government to figure that out. So be aware of what those options are. Don't be afraid to call people like me, people like anyone on this panel, but know what they are. So if you need that, you don't have to question it in the moment. You could say, hey, I wrote down Kendall's number and she said she'd hook me up with a food bank if this ever happened, right? I mean, I can't literally promise that to everyone since my geographical region is small, but at the same point in time, I know that there is someone like me, whether they're on this panel or they're somewhere else in the state, that can help and do that. And it's so, so important to know that. Same with temporary housing, finding a secondary location. We, as a group on this panel, have had many conversations even about, disability access and the fact that there isn't an easy secondary place for people to go. So individuals, for example, that need a wheelchair, they have certain needs related to electricity that aren't addressed by the current program, the current way this unfolds. But there are also people that can help there. So if you know what that is, if you know who to call, it really will change your plan and make it a lifeline. And I think that's what's most important. Next slide. What if planning is not enough? I already said this, so I won't go too far into it again. But the reality is, don't be afraid to reach out. Talk to your community organizations for the next PSPS event. Email us, call us, reach out to us in whatever way you can. Don't be afraid to share information with the CPUC or your utility. Creating this conversation and having it in a public forum, I think, is the best way to modify the way that these PSPS events are currently working and hopefully change them, because we know that they're not working well enough, right? Next slide. Helpful tips and tricks. This was the original goal of my piece of the puzzle, which is basically from a legal standpoint. One thing I always think about when anything like this comes up, whether it's a PSPS event or it's a disaster need, there is this sort of ripple effect that crosses many, many different boundary lines or need lines. And not everyone identifies those issues as legal, but quite frankly, most of the time they really are. And there might be creative solutions to some of these problems. For example, the other day we were having a conversation about the fact that if you have Medi-Cal or if you have Medicare, you should be able to get basically an emergency supply of medication. So you have an additional supply. And while I know that that's not going to help everyone, right? Like, it doesn't help if your medication needs to be refrigerated and you don't have a refrigerator. But it will help some people in the sense that there will be that understanding that they're entitled to that. They have a right to that. And I think that that is part of what comes up with these events. And a lot of it ends up, unfortunately, falling back on the household, where people really have to advocate for themselves. An additional example is, issues from a housing standpoint. There's a possibility of rent reimbursement from a landlord, because there's a requirement under the law that in order for your landlord to require that you pay rent, that your home be habitable. And one of the things that is required in terms of declaring something habitable is access to electricity, as well as, running water, hot water, a stove, all of the things that we think we would find under a roof, right? If they're not there, or if you don't have access to them because an event like PSPS has occurred, it may be possible for you to say to your landlord, I shouldn't have to pay rent for these 4 days because the place that I live in is essentially not a home right now, right? It's not usable for the purposes that we think a home should be usable. And the same is true for homeowners, but in a bit of a different way, where they obviously can't turn to a landlord. So they would, if they have insurance, and as Will said, you should, if you can at all, please have insurance. And in that setting, you can have the same conversation with your insurance company. I wasn't able to stay in my home. My home is not habitable. Therefore, I need to be placed in temporary housing. And as long as you have additional living expense coverage, also known as loss of use coverage, there's a possibility that your insurance company will put you up temporarily in a hotel. I think this is even more true for people with disabilities because of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So both pieces, both from a renter and homeowner standpoint, that there are additional protections that may broaden the scope of one's rights in that situation. But, as people often say, it doesn't hurt to ask, for starters. And secondarily, we've been successful advocating these exact kind of issues for individuals that have gone through PSPS events. And it's important to understand them so you can adequately advocate for them. Next slide, please. What's the bottom line? As everyone has said, have a plan. I know that seems so obvious, yet we all say it. But the truth is, it's really important. Having a plan and understanding not just what you will do, what you can do, where the shortfalls may be for you, but also the role in the community and what the community can help you with if you have a shortfall is super important. Same with updating your utility company. I know it seems like, they're the enemy sometimes because they're the ones that are turning off the power. But the reality is we are where we are. This infrastructure problem has been here for a number of years, and the weather, unfortunately, has caught up with us. So at this point in time, they have requirements and, are attempting to address this the best that they can. And maybe we don't always think it's good enough, but this kind of bureaucracy stuff takes time. Utilities are forced into the same box as any other quasi-government entities. So, talk to them, have that conversation, let them know what your needs are, make sure they understand if you have certain medical needs, and have the conversation. And then lastly, I can't reiterate enough, know your rights. What are you entitled to from your utility company? What are you entitled to from your medical company? What are you entitled to from your insurance company, from your landlord? All the things that I brought up, if you can advocate for yourself in terms of those pieces, it's much more likely you're going to be successful. And to advocate effectively, you have to know and understand and have those conversations. So please reach out to people like us, and we're always here to chat. So, we just want to make sure people are in a position to be okay at the end of the day, be safely housed, period. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kendall, for your presentation. Last but not least, we have Melissa Cannon of Nourish, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Cannon, and I am a senior advocate at Nourish, California. We talked a lot about a lot of resources that are already out there to help you connect with food resources, but I'm going to share some details about a few others because there are more. Nourish California, we're a statewide policy and advocacy organization. Our work is focused on helping connect individuals to the food that they need. We work with a diverse network of partners to advocate for laws and policies that are aimed at improving access to food for all Californians. We are primarily focused on meeting the needs of those who are facing the starkest inequities. So a lot of our work is focused on individuals who are low income. We know that public safety power shutoffs are increasingly impacting people's access to food. We held a focus group just about a month ago with individuals who rely on CalFresh to help purchase their food. And we heard stories of people being out of power, sometimes for a week, having to get rid of food in their homes. And some of that food being purchased with CalFresh. It can be really financially impactful to lose the food that you're storing in your home. And that added on to any other impacts can be devastating, especially for individuals who are low income. So what I am going to cover today is how to replace your CalFresh and WIC benefits if your food has been damaged during a public safety power shutoff or power outage. And then I'm also going to cover a few other emergency food resources that haven't been mentioned today. And then it looks like our slides aren't advancing. So just a heads up to our slides advance so that we're on slide number 5 now. So I'm first going to talk a little bit about CalFresh. So if your food is spoiled because of a power outage, you can actually request to have your CalFresh food benefits replaced. So for those of you who don't know what CalFresh is, CalFresh is our largest nutrition program here in California and in the United States. It provides much needed benefits for Californians to purchase food on an EBT card. That EBT card is loaded with benefits every month that you can use to purchase food from grocery stores, from farmers markets, and also now online at approved retailers. About 4 million Californians rely on CalFresh to make ends meet. So this is a program that has tremendous reach in California with a large number of families depending on CalFresh to help purchase food. If you have been impacted by a public safety power shutoff, and even if you haven't, you might be eligible for the CalFresh program. So before we talk about CalFresh benefit replacements, just want to make sure everyone is aware that you can apply for CalFresh online at either getcalfresh.org or benefitscal.com. You can also call the CalFresh Benefits Helpline at 1-877-847-3663. And you can apply in person at your local county office. So if you are on CalFresh and you've been impacted by a public safety power shutoff, you may be able to get those benefits replaced. If you've been impacted by a power outage, even if your fridge or freezer stopped working, it wasn't a declared power safety public shutoff. If your freezer stopped working for a number of hours, you might be able to have your CalFresh benefits replaced. If your food went bad after those, if your utilities were shut off for another reason, and in other situations, if you were impacted by a natural disaster, a fire or a flood, and if your food was lost for another reason, you might be eligible to have your CalFresh benefits replaced. So to request the CalFresh benefit replacement, you have only 10 days from that point that your food benefits were damaged or destroyed to request a benefit replacement. You have to make that request to replace your CalFresh benefits with your county CalFresh office. The individuals who've created getcalfresh.org also have a helpful tool for you to initiate that process on getcalfresh.org if you have been impacted by this, so that can help initiate that process. But otherwise, you would have to call your CalFresh county office or stop in person or contact your caseworker to request your benefit replacement. The request, it can be made orally, over the phone. It can also be made in writing. You might be required to sign an affidavit attesting to food loss, but that was likely the only proof that the county would require you to provide of that food damage. In some cases, you might not have to have that signed affidavit attesting to food loss if your county knows that you're in a zip code or an area that's been impacted by a public safety power shutoff. Sometimes that 10-day window is extended longer, but it's not guaranteed. So it's best if you've been impacted by that by a public safety power shutoff, your food has been damaged, to go ahead and make that request of your CalFresh office as soon as possible. The 30-day window, it can be extended in limited situations. Our Department of Social Services, who administers CalFresh, is always trying to get as much flexibility for families as possible. But in order to extend that window, we have to get approval from the federal government to go past that 10-day window. So we don't always get that approval in time. And so it's not always that you will have those 30 days to request a replacement. A county worker would work with you to figure out what percentage of your benefits for that month could be replaced. You can't go back to prior months. You can only replace benefits purchased within that month. In some cases, the benefits would be loaded automatically. With power safety shutoffs, when the state has enough advance notice, they have been requesting approval from the federal government to do mass replacements all at once. And that funding just shows up automatically on an individual's EBT card. So there may be cases where benefits would be replaced automatically. So I talk about WIC benefit replacements too, because you can also have your WIC benefits replaced if your food spoiled due to a power outage. For those of you who aren't familiar with WIC, WIC is the acronym for the Special Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program for women, infants, and children. It's a program that supports about 1 million California pregnant women, postpartum women, babies, and children under the age of 5. WIC provides benefits to buy healthy foods, to buy formula. Also, the individuals who work at WIC provide high quality breastfeeding support, nutrition education and information, and they can also help connect individuals to a number of different supports. So they help do that kind of assessment and help connect individuals to healthcare and other supports within the community. If you were impacted by and your food was lost and you needed help, you could of course apply for WIC and get access to services. The application process, you can apply over the phone at that WIC helpline. You can also contact your local WIC agency, or you can apply in person. So right now, you don't actually have to go into the office to apply for WIC because of some flexibilities during the pandemic. So if you already are on WIC and your WIC food was damaged or lost in an emergency or during a power outage, you can get your benefits replaced. The process is pretty simple, even simpler than for CalFresh, which has a number of steps and processes. With WIC, you just have to contact your local WIC agency. So you can give them a call, contact the local WIC agency where you are set up to get your WIC benefits from, or you can stop by in person and staff members will work with you. They'll figure out what benefits you've used or help you get your benefits loaded that might have been lost during that power outage. And the staff members at WIC can also help connect you with other community resources and supports. So they might be able to help connect you to other services to help you during that power outage. In addition to some of those programs and the programs that others mentioned, I know we have food banks within many California communities that you can find a list of food banks at www.cdss.ca.gov/food-banks. The California Association of Food Banks is also another resource for you finding a local food bank. Food banks often will provide resources to families during disasters, and so might have some additional supports ready to go if you've lost access to food and need emergency assistance. Another program that may be available to you, but in some limited situations, is Disaster CalFresh. So if you're a victim of a natural disaster, but you're not eligible for regular CalFresh because your income places you too high, or perhaps because of other reasons like your immigration status, you might be eligible for Disaster CalFresh. Disaster CalFresh food assistance is available to individuals who might have had food loss as a result of a fire or a related power outage, if they incurred disaster-related expenses, experienced a disruption in income, or had damage to their home or their self-employment property. Disaster CalFresh, it was designed as a way to temporarily meet the needs of individuals who've been impacted by natural disasters. We see it most often during the fires that we have here frequently in California. But Disaster CalFresh is a program that is not always available. There are a number of steps that our state must take before we can roll out Disaster CalFresh, and these steps often take a lot of time. So Disaster CalFresh is only available when we have three things happen. There's a presidential declaration for individual assistance, that's declared for the affected area. Commercial channels of food distribution have to have been disrupted, and the state of California has to have been approved for operating a Disaster CalFresh program. Now, all of those steps can take, on average, 60 days before we can roll out a Disaster CalFresh benefit to individuals after a disaster. So I'm mentioning it here because it might be a resource that's available to you if you've been impacted by a fire-related power outage and you've had your food destroyed or you've been impacted financially, as a way to help you recoup some of your lost costs. But keep in mind that this program would likely not be immediately available to you to help you get emergency food assistance. If Disaster CalFresh was available to you to apply, you would have to meet the household eligibility requirements. So there are still some income eligibility requirements for Disaster CalFresh, and you would have to apply in person. Sometimes you can apply over the phone at your local county welfare department or another designated site. I put in a link here to where you can go to learn more about Disaster CalFresh. Typically, once the Disaster CalFresh is approved, there's a very short window to apply for this benefit. So you want to just keep that in mind. If you've been impacted by one of these a disaster and weren't eligible for CalFresh, you might want to contact your county welfare department to see if you can get notified of whether or not Disaster CalFresh is going to be available to you. And then that's it before we head into Q&A. Just a quick note to say we'd love to hear from you if you've been affected by this issue, if you have thoughts in terms of what changes you would like to see to support individuals in getting greater access to food during public safety power outages. And I'll leave you with my contact information also in the chat. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We're going to go to our Q&A. We do have 5 minutes, so we may not get to every question. So for that, if I could ask our panelists to please put their email and contact information in the chat for folks to email after the event. But we'll get to the first question. This is from Nicholas. Does LADWP have a sign up for the PSPS info and CRC support too? Wasn't able to search online for any signups with alerts. Was able to see that for the 2019 Getty fire, LADWP had 2,600 customers out of power.
That's a good question. This is William Simonsek, and I'm not 100% sure. I'm actually looking up right now as we speak what the answer to this is.
I'm a little confused by the question, but at minimum, your utility is required to alert you. You just have to sign up with your utility, and you could do that by calling them and or by going online and signing up for them. Outside of that, all counties, at least within the state of California and quite frankly, many other states have the NIXL alert system. And you could do that by literally Googling NIXL California, and it will come up and you will be able to register for what basically applications you want to be warned of, PSPS events, disasters, but there are other things like crime in your area, things like that. So those are the two that are most generally used in this kind of setting, if that helps.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for Kendall. Hello, Kendall. Is there a utility requirement in regards to the power outages caused by the enhanced power line safety settings?
Maybe is the answer. And I know that's not a good one, but the reality is that, as I mentioned before, the CPUC oversight of the PSPS events have left PSPS events is an issue of last resort. So it's not supposed to be something that is used unless there is nothing else that can be done. But unfortunately, we're kind of in a situation where the infrastructure is so poor that the utility industry doesn't really have a lot of choice. Either there's going to be a fire or they have to turn off power. There have been moves with the CPUC and the utility conversation partners, so all utilities basically, that have attempted to limit the impact, meaning that they're trying to take steps from an infrastructure standpoint that don't just put all PSPS events or all shutoffs in general connected to the same grid lines, and that has worked in some areas. So the answer to the question, I think, really would be, it kind of depends where you are and who controls your power, and then whether your power is directly connected to a main tower, or if you're a little more remote. And unfortunately, the more remote you are, the less likely it is that they can, pick and choose, and the less oversight there is there, because there really aren't a lot of options. I hope that answers that, but feel free to email me if it doesn't.
Thank you. And we're going to do one final question before we wrap it up. What are some of the best alert apps or general alerts to sign up for? Is there a list to make sure we are registered to at least the basic ones?
Again, your utility company and NIXL are the two that are the best. There are some others, so you can email us on the side. I say let's answer one more question, because I think we did kind of answer this one though.
Also, I see, oops, sorry to interrupt. I wanted to go ahead because I was actually about to answer this in the chat about an info sheet. So we are in the process and have created some flyers on this at NLSLA. I'm going to put our disaster assistance page in there. We have the information on the utility protections, and we are working currently on providing a flyer for the medical insurance issues that I discussed previously.
Okay, and final question we'll ask is, for the people that have mortgages, can they go to the bank and tell the bank that their home is not livable for those many days and get their mortgage reduced based on those days?
Maybe. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac both have disaster relief programs. Those programs have been known to cover PSPS events. They don't necessarily always cover PSPS events, but those are the two largest mortgage providers. You can literally Google either one and see if your loan is owned by either one of them. Outside of that, there's been a movement in California to basically create disaster banking programs within mortgage criteria areas that impact Californians. They didn't exist really prior to 2017. It wasn't a commonality, but A, it's worth it to ask. B, it definitely might be possible from a Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac standpoint. And C, it is something we're pushing all of us on a policy level because we understand the importance of that.
Excellent. And I'm going to do one more question because we have one more. How do people get this information through FEMA 211? If we send people to 211 for assistance, will they get all this information? Is each presenter working with 211?
So that's a multi-element answer for this question. So that's one of the difficulties. One of the reasons why we are holding this right now is because theoretically you should be able to get at least some of this information through 211. I wouldn't bother calling FEMA. They're not going to give you any of this. And honestly, even the critical needs, other needs assistance that I discussed, if you call a random FEMA rep, the chances they're going to get you that is low, really. So the answer that we're actually not working with 211. We actually all kind of met individually and worked through the legal aid organization responding to disasters. We're working on this, on trying to centralize this information, trying to get more flyers up. I wish I had a better answer than this presentation as to where to get this information, but we are working on it. For the time being, this or 211 would be your best bet, or to contact one of the presenters, such as myself, individually.
Well, and just to add to that, 211 can connect you with organizations like our own. So if you call 211 and say, I need a food bank, they'll tell you where the food bank is. If you call 211 and say, I need legal support for a PSPS event, they might not know exactly where to send you, but like in Sonoma County, they would absolutely send you to legal aid of Sonoma County. So I think Will's main point is the stuff is improving. We all individually well, maybe not all of us, but most of us individually work with 211, so they're updated on our information and the things that we supply. But what we don't know is if all community-based organizations actually have the same kind of relationship with 211. So I would use it, but I wouldn't be deterred if 211 doesn't answer your question. And again, feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy. Will and I especially are always happy to see if we can find an answer if you hit a wall.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We are going to go ahead and wrap it up. I want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists today. Thank you for your time and all the great information. As was stated in the chat, we will be sending out the slides and everything via email. So if you did register, we've got your email. We will send those out. And then if you want to watch the recording, it is on the CFILC YouTube page. That link is in the chat. Our CFILC name is CFILC 1982. Please subscribe. But we want to thank everybody so much for attending. And once again, thank you to all of our panelists, and do have a great evening. Good night, everyone.
Thank you so much for attending, and thank you guys for moderating. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you
Much
for the
appreciated.
California. Thank you to the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers for providing this Zoom technology this evening. I slightly messed up the slides, but I think I recovered. But I want to thank them specifically for that. And I want to thank all of our presenters for taking the time today. And I wish everyone a safe and happy evening.